Hello and welcome to the Power Driven Podcast. Today we're having a fun episode, a fun topic. We're talking about dynos, everything dyno, your freak experience, correction factors, how to spot a fake dyno number, and advertising stuff. But we should just get to the controversy. I think we should.
The controversy is always correction factor.
Yeah.
That's a corrected, and that's on the mountain. That doesn't count. The only way your dyno counts is if it's in Missouri on Dave Dunbar's dyno in 2006.
Or the UCC dyno.
Or the custom auto UCC Superflow at the Ultimate Call It Challenge.
Early
only
May.
at low altitude. It does not count in Salt Lake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there's a lot.
There's a lot of heat online, the forums and the chat rooms. I mean, and it's been going on for a long time.
So what's causing it is everybody's trying to brag they have the highest horsepower diesel truck in the industry. Back in the day, it was like, I have the highest horsepower red diesel truck of this vintage.
Yeah.
Well, they've moved past that now. Now it's just the highest horsepower.
Yeah.
So we've made some leaps and bounds, but the controversy really arises over at different altitudes, you get different correction factors.
Mm-hmm. But quickly, before we go to correction factor, I mean, if you're like totally new to a dyno, you don't know what that is. A dyno is an instrument that measures power. It's got these big, huge steel drums. You put your back tires on it. They strap you down to it. You floor it. It measures how much power you're making to the ground. And then you can go to your buddy and say, my truck made more power than yours.
Yep, that's that in a nutshell.
And
That's
if your
very
buddy,
good description.
if your buddy lives in Missouri, he's like, no, you didn't. Your correction factor, dude. You're totally lame.
What were you uncorrected? Yeah, no.
And so there's a huge controversy, you know, and I feel like it's kind of like lately it's been better, but I don't read the forums as much as I used to.
They still go. And like, what's fun to me is like people will post a number and other people get really butthurt.
Oh, people get mad.
Like real mad. I'm like, I don't understand why they care so much.
Yeah, it's like, I just went to an event and I drove my truck on the dyno and this is the number they gave me and now I'm a jerk.
Yeah, like how dare I?
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, everybody.
And to give people a little context about how dynos change from location, you went to an event on the East Coast. You drove from Utah out to, what is it, Delaware or wherever the heck you went to that all truck challenge. How much power was your red mega cab daily making here in Utah with no changes? And then what did it make there?
It made like 1,100 here. And then on that dyno, it made a little over 1,400 and change.
Now, what did you do to pick up said 300 horsepower gain?
Oh, I did nothing. Maybe I pushed the pedal harder.
That's a real problem sometimes. You
actually
never
is.
really know.
So people that have dynos aren't quite as particular about the whole bragging and this and that. I mean, a little bit, but they understand there's differences.
There's different brands. I mean, just from brand to brand, you get a difference in dyno numbers. Like how you, and then how you drive it, it's huge. People are like, oh, I bolted these parts of my truck and it made 50 horsepower less than it was supposed to. How you drive it on the dyno is huge. And that'll absolutely account for that.
But quickly, I do want to talk about like what is a correction factor? Like why does it exist in the first place?
So correction factor on the dyno, it says SAE after the dyno number. That means it's corrected by the Society of Automotive Engineers. Essentially, gas engines, naturally aspirated, they lose power as the air gets thinner. There's less air pressure as the temperature goes up. Everybody knows this in the summer. Your vehicle does not feel as snappy as it does in the dead of winter. It's a proven thing. So they made this correction, an altitude or a density altitude compensation factor. And the DynoJet software or Mustang software or Superflow, they all have an SAE correction factor that you can just simply toggle on or off. And it shows you what that vehicle would do under standard atmospheric laboratory conditions. We're talking 70 degrees, perfect humidity, sea level.
Mm-hmm. Some defined condition. Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's just there to correct for non-standard conditions. Because even if you owned a dyno, let's say I was testing air intakes. Well, what if it was 90 degrees today and a thunderstorm comes through, and tonight when I'm testing this new air intake, it's 48 degrees. Well, here in Utah, you can get that swing, but it's way cooler air. You're like, oh my gosh, I picked up 20 horsepower. Did I really pick up 20 horsepower? That's why the dyno has correction there, so that you as a tester can compare from day to day, different conditions, even on your own dyno.
Mm-hmm.
Which I will say, like if you're doing an air filter testing, you like as a company, you have to do your due diligence and not set yourself for failure like that. Because if a storm front comes in and now you got a 20 horsepower difference, you're now trying to analyze the corrected data to see if the data you even have is accurate, and that if you need to do the test again. So there's a lot to go into it. But what's really nice is that, like, if let's just say you built an engine and you did some stuff in there, whatever, and you want to compare it to your old engine from a year ago, you don't have to try to find a day that's the same temperature, same everything, humidity, whatnot. You can generally just do a dyno poll. And what we found is the correction factor is indeed correcting for a lack of oxygen. If it's hotter that day when you dyno your new engine, it will make a little less horsepower. The correction factor will bump you up a little bit, and it's apples to apples.
How does the dyno even know what to correct? Does it have like a weather station or something on it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Very accurate.
Yeah, so it has a weather station. So it measures air pressure, air temperature,
Humidity.
and humidity. And that's pretty much all they really need to know to figure out how much it needs to correct.
And once they have that, they can just, it's just math, simple math from there.
Yeah.
Now, one step further in correction factors, you get on a super flow and it has an added correction factor.
The SAE plus.
SAE, and then it has a DJHP, stands for dyno jet horsepower. And
Dyno Jets was a pretty big player in the game, and they're very well known. And so,
and they are, think of them like a slot machine. They're a looser slot machine. Dyno Jets read a little bit higher. And so Superflow, to combat this, because a shop that bought a Superflow, which is way more money than a Dyno Jet, by the way, if they're out there advertising my turbo or my whatever makes X amount of power, and then some other shop has a lesser product, but they test on a Dyno Jet, they're like, well, my product is better. So Superflow, in their ingenious marketing, decided, you know what? We're going to put a Dyno Jet correction factor option that the dyno operator can click here, and it just adds another about 3.5 to 5% onto the SAE, 3.5 to depend on the atmospheric conditions. So that's why correction factor is so disputed, because it's so.
And that's why when somebody gets online and says, dude, I just hit 2,000 horsepower, people are like, oh, did you really? Was that with the Dyno Jet and the SA correction factor?
It's not even that. It's like the people that have like a bolt-on turbo and saying that they make 900 horse. You're like, I mean, it's possible for sure. You never really know, but chances are
a GT55?
probably not.
It's a stock replacement with a billet wheel upgrade only. It's not even bigger. They're like, I just doubled the horsepower with this bolt-on billet wheel. No, you didn't.
Hey, I made 917 with a HE351 on the UCC dyno, not at UCC. So it's very possible.
But you also upgrade the turbine side on that as well.
Yeah, for sure. It's still a drop-in though.
Very true, very true. But so there's a lot of that stuff going on where you're comparing. But the dyno's real use to me is like it's a tool. Like I did 1,400 horsepower at that event, and I knew it was a false number. The reason it didn't bother me is because I was in a competition. I was on the same dyno with everybody else. So I was competing on a fair playing field. So we were all like going for a high number and get points towards this event we were in. And so it was fair. Now, if I was having to get points versus somebody else on the West Coast getting points, you could not do that. You could not score one dyno on a different day, a different place, different dyno. It has to be fair. So I always felt, even if that number was fake, everybody else's number was equally fake, and they were equally. It's just a percentage. He made 20% more than me. That's real.
Yeah. So I actually have a great example of that. I went up to I was a dyno event up north, and there were two dynos. So many trucks out there that they had two dynos to run it. So they had the small turbo, small compound class on one dyno, and the big turbo, big compound class, and the unlimited class on the bigger dyno. And so I wanted to run my tow truck, see if I could, claim the W in the small compound class. And I ran it on the small compound dyno, the smaller dyno. Well, the person I was competing against, the main runner-up there, he also wanted to spray it. And so he ran on the bigger dyno, and he made like 5 more horsepower than me. And I was like, you know what? I'm petty. Like, I'm not going to accept I'm not going to accept the lose here. So I ran back up on the big dyno, paid for an entry again, ran up on the big dyno. I was like, you know what? If I'm going to lose, I'm going to lose on the same dyno that he ran on. And then I made 5 more horsepower than him. So, and so that was just the way of the road.
So at that day, the difference between those two dynos was roughly 10 horsepower for your truck. Even though they're same atmospheric conditions, same correction factor, there's just differences there.
Yeah, just a little bit different. That's all.
Yeah, if you want a true comparison, it needs to be the same dyno. That's what's so handy. Like a shop like us here, we have our own dyno. We do all our testing on our turbos, and it's really important. Dynos are important because if you put something on your truck, like I remember putting stuff in my truck and I go out there and if it wasn't a lot different, I thought, well, it's somewhat different because you have that internal bias. Like I'm sure it's better.
Yeah, it's like a placebo effect.
Yes.
I spent money on this air intake.
Obviously, I picked up power.
Yeah, you pull the silencer ring out of your factory turbo.
Yeah.
Dude.
This is like
that's a power adder.
Because you can hear the turbo.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So it feels fast. Woo, it feels good.
But is it
you know?
really faster?
Uh-uh.
No, we put it on the dyno. No, it's not.
Yeah, and so a dyno's real purpose, honestly, for us anyway, is to measure accurately very, very minute differences. Did the part actually make a difference? And you couldn't do that like going back and forth dynos. It has to be the same dyno.
Yeah.
Really has to be with the ACE on our dyno. The correction factor is good enough that if we do it the next day, it's still accurate because it's still our dyno.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, sometimes you can't do something like within 10 minutes. You know, if we're
But if I
swapping
was-
heads or turbos or something.
But if we were comparing something that was 1,000 horsepower vehicle and they were 1 horsepower difference from the change, we're talking 0.1%.
Yeah.
We would be like, day to day, I don't know that was a real gain. But if there's a enough of a difference, let's say on a 100 horsepower vehicle, it picks up 10 horsepower, 10%. I don't care if it's 2 days apart. That was a legitimate gain.
Mm-hmm.
So there's still even, and just run to run consistency. No dyno reads perfect every time. The engine doesn't actually make the same power. It's different temperature of oil, coolant.
Intercooler, heat soaked. I mean, there's so much that changes things.
Yeah, Firepunk did a dyno. They were comparing a before and after intake horn or something, and they kind of laid out their rigmarole where they dynoed it and waited 3 minutes, dynoed it, waited 3 minutes, dynoed it, and then waited like 20 minutes and dynoed it again. And so no changes between all that. There was like a 40 horsepower swing, and then when they let it set for like 20 minutes, it got right back up to that first dyno run. So like very repeatable. They did it multiple times, but it's very, very easy to change no parts and make a huge difference to the numbers you get.
And that kind of leads me to my next like thing that always bothered me back in the day was using dynos for marketing. Like we've done it, and everybody who has one and makes products do. But like,
And that's why you got the dyno.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, and plus it's a lot of fun, honestly. But I mean,
it was the best business decision we ever made.
Yeah.
We had like a certain amount of money, and we're like, I know, let's spend 90% of that on this new dyno for our business.
You're like, wives are like, do you really need this though?
Yes, we do. Absolutely, we do. So, but like you said, I mean, that's pretty impressive to see that Firepunk results, like that huge of a change. And so when you're like marketing something, if you want to be ethical, you really have to like take precautions and put a lot of effort into making the results repeatable.
Oh my gosh. So I've basically commandeered that
Yes, you have.
of that
You've done
aspect
amazingly well.
of the company for the last couple of years. There's a lot that goes into it to try to make it accurate. I mean, if you see us, we're if it's a hood stack truck, we try to do it all of our really scientific testing on the hood stack trucks, because then we can park it out backwards and water down the intercooler between every single run, and we water it down to the same temperature. We're keeping track of oil temperature, inlet temperature, trying to get it back to the same exact situation time after time. And so that's part of it. We also try to do all like the lead into the runs all with tuning. So that way the tune itself is bringing the fuel in at the right RPM, the right time, trying to make it so it's super consistent. So that way, if you look at any of our data where we're comparing different turbos, especially in the last year or two, like the start RPM or the start horsepower is almost identical every single time. Sometimes if we see like, oh, we got a 5 horsepower higher start RPM or start horsepower, I'm looking at that and saying, okay, why did that do it? We generally do like at least 3 runs to back it up. And okay, yep, all 3 of those are 5 horsepower higher. That's just the bolt-on part we changed that created that effect. There's a lot that goes into it.
And the reason we are so big on this is I remember years ago looking at advertisements in magazines like Diesel Power and all these different magazines that were out there. And I was looking at an air filter ad, and it was so offensive to me because even at this point in time, I had like a basic understanding of how dynos worked. And they showed this thing where, you know, it picked up 5 peak horsepower. It said, but look here at the beginning of the graph, we had this huge jump. We're like 150 foot-pounds higher, like way higher at the beginning of the graph. And so it showed like the area under the curve is just massively better with this air filter versus the stock air filter. And I'm like, this is so bogus. Why would that be bogus, Will?
So they were basically, they didn't run the runs the same. They started the second run with the part they're trying to showcase well, this air intake kit, and they started the run about 50 horsepower higher. They basically rode the brakes, built boost before it ever recorded any data. Then they let off the brakes and floored it. And because it started higher, the turbo spooled faster. And so it made it look like, and it did on the second run, it did make more torque because it made power earlier in the run. But they could have done the same thing with the stock one had they power braked it a little bit before the run. And so it's just a little deceptive marketing. They even take it a step further sometimes. You ever notice how, I'm not trying to pick up on K&N, but that's the one I can think of off the top of my head. Their graphs are really jaggedy. Well, dynos don't read, they're taking several samples and there's ups and downs and there's a smoothing factor you put in there and it kind of smooths out the little anomaly peaks and valleys and gives you smooth numbers. Well, if you're trying to get the biggest, highest spike against the worst dip on the stock one, you turn the smoothing off. So you have these really jagged dyno runs so that, oh my gosh, we picked up 20 horsepower peak at this random RPM for no reason other than the dyno jaggedness up on the one run and down on the other. And so, I mean, there's lots of little things there. So when I look at dyno graphs from other companies, I want to make sure the A-B test both start at the same horsepower and torque, because they're not at full throttle at the start of the run. You try to start them even. And then I'm trying to look, is the graph smooth? Now, if it's too smooth, like they drew it in Microsoft Paint, then it's also bogus.
Yeah.
And so, and this goes back to Meyer's point where he says the runs start at the same time. So if you see a dyno graph that says, product A, product B, look how much better ours is. If the beginning of that run, one has a huge head start, the run is bogus. They need to start at basically the same spot. Now, maybe the air filter would start a couple of horsepower higher because naturally aspirated, it just makes more power because it flows better. Okay, I can accept that if it's a horsepower or two better naturally aspirated at the very beginning of the run.
Yeah, a great example of that was our head porting video.
Yeah.
It started higher. Why? Because it had the same exact amount of fuel, but that little extra air helped it come up that little bit, like made a little bit more static horsepower right before the fuel started ramping in.
Yeah, and so, but they were still very, very close. I mean, it's not like huge
within,
difference. Yeah, and so when I look at dyno graphs, and when you look at dyno graphs, if you're looking at products and you're wanting to compare stuff, make sure if you have a comparison dyno that the runs, are ran the same way like Will was talking about, because otherwise it's totally bogus what you're looking at. It's just a guy ran the dyno a different way to get a different result.
It's very, very, there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, like 5 years ago when we dyno, I remember you and I having like a rigmarole. What we did back then is we said, okay, we're going to start the run at 1500 RPM. So you'd rev it up to like 1800. Yep. You would let off the throttle. The moment I saw 1500, I'd start the dyno. And the moment you saw 1400, you'd floor it again. And like that was the best way we could, because you come into the window a little bit harder. Let's just say you went through the gears a little bit faster. That's going to put more heat in the turbo. It's going to spool faster. Yeah. And like, if you're trying to sell parts, that's a way you can do it. But I'm a nerd. I want to know what we did. Did we make a difference? And it's always so demotivating when you like look at the graph, you're like, oh, heck yeah, I picked up 10 horse. And then you're like, okay, I started a little different. Yes. Did that cause it?
So remember when we were testing that new 480 Aggressor we just released? Yeah. And we were dynoing back and forth, and we had this 15 horsepower anomaly.
Oh my gosh, that pissed me off so much.
Because we had all the tuning perfect, everything was perfect.
I swapped turbos back and forth 3 times because I would be like, okay, it's making the same number. I'd swap a turbo on and it didn't do what I thought it should do. And so I'm like, okay, put the original turbo back on. Yep, it's not the same as it was before. Try to figure it out, make whatever. Okay, it's doing what it's supposed to do. And like we're changing the same day, like within an hour of each other. I'm swapping turbos. And like when we do anything like that, where you may be only picking up, 10, 15 horsepower difference, we always like to finish on the original turbo or the original air filter, the original whatever it is, because that way, if it makes 913 the first time, go through all the turbos and then come back and it makes 913 again, nothing changed in the truck. There's not a boost leak that developed or something like that could cause problems. And so like that's what we kept doing, is going back to that original, and it kept being different, and it pissed me off.
Will found the culprit.
In that case, we happened to be filming, and I noticed that the wind had changed directions. A thunderstorm had come through, not right over the top of us, but enough to change the wind direction. And it was blowing this hot steam off of the intercooler into the air filter.
Because remember, we watered down the intercoolers
to try to make it as consistent as possible. Yeah.
And when you put 80 pounds of boost for one of those, it gets pretty hot and it steams off the water sitting on the fins.
And the way the wind was blowing is blowing that hot air off the intercooler into the turbo. And
very humid air. Now, the weather station's not there. It's over by the dyno controllers. It does not know it's sucking in straight up humid air from Florida.
And if the air had changed 5 degrees, I wouldn't expect that truck to make 15 difference. I mean, that's a in my mind, a 40-degree difference probably in temperature. So that steam and water is what was doing it. And finally, the way we solved the problem and the way we tested the theory is we put a fan outside, even though it's outside the shop, blowing from clean air across the filter towards the radiator. So it had no chance of sucking in that hot radiator and intercooler steamed air. And all of a sudden, boom, is printing numbers within 1 horsepower every time.
Like that's more like it. Like I've been trying to figure out where the anomaly was coming from. I mean, I was starting every run at the same oil temperature. I was like, where the?
I mean, it's crazy the lengths. I remember one other time when we were testing air filters, and somebody had done a test, and we had this AFE filter, and we had our power driven filter, and I wanted to see if my filter was better than these ginormous AFE oiled gauze filters that didn't filter that well, but they flowed well. And I'm back and forth testing, and I pull all the air filters off. I had a 6-inch inlet on the junker drag truck. So I had a 5-inch or 5.5-inch turbo, and then I necked that up to, so I had a 6-inch inlet pipe on this thing. And when I took the filter off, it lost 15 horsepower. I'm like, what? How did I lose power? Then I put the power driven filter on there, gained 15 horsepower, put the AFE on, and I think I was down like 7 or 8 horsepower with the AFE filter. Because I was really excited at first because I'd gained power with the power driven filter. But then when I went no filter and it lost, I was perplexed. And I mean, I carried that with me for like a year. And all of a sudden we bought a flow bench. And on the flow bench, I put that same 6-inch inlet pipe on the flow bench.
Because it bugged him for a full year. He's like, I'm going to figure out what the heck's going on.
And I put that 6-inch pipe, and there, an open 6-inch pipe has, disruptive non-laminar flow. It does not flow as well as a 6-inch pipe with a power driven filter or an AFE filter for that matter. And getting back to the filters, the reason I thought our filter actually flowed the best, it had a little bit better of a velocity stack right where it met the pipe. And so, because neither filter media was at the limits of flow at that 1 PSI pressure drop I was testing at.
It just directed the air. Ours happened to direct the air the best on
into
that
there.
6-inch pipe.
And so sometimes you get dyno results that you can't explain. And if I can't explain them and they don't make sense, I'm not going to publish them because the internet lives a long time, man. You want to hang your neck out there that I'm the greatest guy in the world and I've never won a drag race with my diesel dragster. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I don't know where that got. Okay, cool. That's a good point to make.
So dynos are fun. I mean, there's a lot of controversy around them. They're an amazing tool. They're also a lot of fun. It's kind of what got me into performance. It's what gave me the horsepower bug. I've always wanted horsepower and go fast, but like on my truck, the first thing I did, like you'd say competition wise, or like not just messing around, was actually go to a dyno event. It was actually a drag race hosted by DHRA. Let you know how long I've been in this game. The DHRA was hosting an event in Salt Lake, and I didn't go to a race. I just went to watch, and but they had a dyno. So I'm like, I'll go up and dyno my truck. And I was super excited because I had done like, back in the time, this is pretty standard. I had a fuel plate, the number 10.
Ooh.
Number 10 fuel plate. That's right.
I heard good things.
It transformed my truck, okay? Smoky, but fast. I had some DDP injectors in there, some delivery valves, timing was bumped, and I had a turbo. I had an industrial injection Silver 64, which is a 64 millimeter with a larger turbine in the S300 frame, and 5-speed. Holy Grail truck.
Did you have a clutch in there too?
I did, South Bend. Yep, single disc.
Can't hide money.
Yeah. Well, I couldn't afford the dual disc. So I had the single disc in there. So I got on there and I was super excited, but I was also very, very nervous. Like, I mean, the first time you do anything, it's like nerve wracking and it shouldn't be. And if you're wanting to do something you should do this, but realize you're going to be nervous, but everyone is their first time and we all know, so don't worry about it. But
I still get nervous.
Yeah, even
I've done it probably over 1,000 times. Still get nervous. I don't know why.
Something about the event and being in front of a crowd, being in front of people, and like having your number on the screen, like
you're like on a pedestal, like you're like on a podium, and your baby, your truck, you're manning it, you're trying to drive it, and there's nothing to distract you. Like when you're drag racing or anything else, like there's so many things you got to remember to do and whatever, and you just kind of like get sidetracked with going through the rolls, going through and making sure everything's done. Dyno, you just drive up and then they tell you to go and you go, and it's like you're just like sitting there like, how's this gonna go?
Yeah, but they're very helpful, and that's what
Oh,
he was. That's what he was to me. He was very helpful, and I got up there and I got the fifth gear, and he said, "Okay, go ahead and floor it." And it's like, "Okay," so I floored it, and he said, "Okay," and I let off, and he's like, "Okay, 534 horsepower." I was like, "Oh, sweet, man!" I was so stoked because I mean,
Did you make it into the 4-digit torque club?
I did. I was over 1,000 foot-pounds. I don't remember. I remember 534. I don't know why I can't remember my exact torque number, but it was over 1,000 foot-pounds. And so I was pretty stoked about that. So I was very happy.
Did they issue you a Calvin and Hobbes sticker so that you could pee on things that don't make 4-digit torque?
That's right. Yeah. They did not get those out of that event. And I was glad but I would have put it on. I'm not much of a sticker guy, but
were you tempted to get a license plate that said, "Here, Hemi"?
Oh, did you, Will?
I was still in the 5-speed. It wasn't exactly fast. If I could start in third and get the third to fourth roll-ons, we're pretty good. Other than that, it's kind of rough. But
oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was super fun. And I just think people worry about this kind of stuff. They think, oh, I don't want to go. There's a lot of worries about them, but for me, it's a lot of fun. Like one of the worries we hear a lot about is like, I don't want to blow my truck up. I don't want to down it because I don't want to blow my truck up.
Yeah, there's so many videos of people blowing their stuff up on the dyno, and you're like, I don't want to be one of those.
I've done it.
Yeah, same. But
I guess I guess.
Yep, you've done it.
All the time.
Well, yes, you have. I've been there.
All three of us have blown up stuff on the dyno. So take this next section with a grain of salt. But you should not be scared about blowing your crap up on a dyno.
You should. And so the difference between that is like you get idiots like us that are trying to push the limit of their truck. And if you're trying to push the limit, would you do that on the street where it's, first of all, unsafe, and second of all, you don't really have a definitive answer whether it's that much better or not? Like, did it really make more power? Like, especially when you're talking 1,000 horse and up, trying to put that down is very sketchy and very dangerous, and like it's not easy to do. So you're gonna do that on the dyno.
Yeah.
It's a much safer environment, and you're gonna push the limit, and you're very possibly going to blow it up when you push it harder than you ever have before. And that's when I blew mine up. I'm sure that's when Todd blew his up.
Mine was making funny noises, and I just kept dynoing this one.
Okay, well, for most of us. But no, if you have a truck and it's your daily driver or whatever, and you floor it all the time on the street, flooring it all the time on the street, going through gears while floored is way harder on your truck than just being in one gear and flooring it on a dyno. There's really no difference between doing a highway pull and doing a pull on the dyno where you're just, flooring it there. It's all the
way
same.
smoother.
And it's way safer if something did go wrong.
I mean, think about your truck. So you start dyno pulls at what, 3,000 RPM in overdrive sometimes?
Yeah.
How much mile per hour is that? 140? Are you going to go out on the street at 140 and then floor your 2,000 horsepower truck and see what it does?
I wouldn't. No. It'd be so bad.
Yeah. And that's what yeah.
Yeah. So while we understand people being nervous about blowing their stuff up because nobody wants to blow their stuff up, if you do it on the road, it will safely do it on the dyno, and you can measure it and have a good time. If you're going to try, like, hey, I'm going to throw a bunch of nitrous at it. Yeah, good luck. You know what I mean? I understand. And it's fun to do. I'm not saying don't do it, but if you're doing that, you're probably already experienced and know what you're doing a little bit.
I mean, everyone had to try to start one time. Like, let's be honest.
Well, did you throw nitrous at yours your first time?
No.
What'd you do?
Well, the first time you throw nitrous at it,
could your first dyno experience. Like, I'm going to throw a bunch of nitrous at this.
Oh, I thought we were saying something else. My first dyno experience,
no nitrous.
No nitrous.
Yeah, probably nobody has nitrous the first dyno experience.
One of our former employees had a gas 350 truck that he had built himself, and we sprayed it, ghetto fogged it, because he wanted to get in the, was it 300 horsepower club he's trying to get into?
I wasn't there. I don't remember.
I think so.
Well, was that him by himself, or were you there with him?
I think it was Josh McCormick spraying it for him.
That's a different story. Yeah.
And it was what they call the ghetto fog, where they crack the bottle open and fog everything. But,
oh boy.
You're not going to do that at any kind of real competition where a normal person is going to show up and want to dyno their truck.
My first time on the dyno, I was graduating college and I left. I lived in Utah and I had to move to Las Vegas, and I had to get an apartment to live in for me and my young wife. And, we're newlyweds. And so I had an issue of Diesel Power magazine that had just come out, and it had listed every chassis dyno by state. And I saw that there was one in North Las Vegas. And I was like, ooh. Now, if you're not from Vegas, North Las Vegas is kind of rough. Not a good place to get your first apartment. And but it was close to the dyno. So I signed the first lease I could find in North Las Vegas, ran over to the dyno in my 99, and I cracked 499.2 horsepower.
Oh, jeez. That's terrible. That's like the worst number you could possibly get.
I wanted to be in the 500 horsepower club, couldn't get there. So, but yeah, that was my first dyno experience. 500 horsepower, 99, 24 valve truck.
Were you excited or were you bummed? I mean, obviously you're bummed because you didn't get 500, but were you like, wow, that's pretty cool. I just hit 499.2 horsepower.
So I was excited because at the time that truck made 235 stock, and everybody at that time was buying like a industrial injection silver bullet turbo or a B1 bomber, all these random turbos that don't even exist anymore. And I had bought $125 used turbo off an 06 from eBay, and I had put it on there with silicone couplers and pipes, and it wasn't good quality craftsmanship. I built my own injectors with vice grips because I didn't own a vice. I mean, it was rough, but it was very satisfying to go from 235 to 499.
Well, 235 the crank, not even at the wheels. It wouldn't do 235 at the wheels.
That's true. So
you probably went from like 199 to 499. That's a massive jump.
It's like 300 horsepower. That's dude, I doubled the horsepower.
That's very rewarding. You did double it. Plus,
it was a lot of fun. I mean, I posted about it on the internet, of course. I took pictures of the dyno graph, posted it on, I think, competitiondiesel.com. And the rest is history.
The fire was lit. I gotta beat it.
And
How can I beat it? I gotta beat it.
Something bad about dynos, because like I'm a competitive person. I think you guys are competitive people as well. The moment you see a number on a dyno, you're like, okay, now I gotta beat it. And so you have to you do all these dumb things and trying to like beat a number on a dyno. And it's very addicting.
Yeah, it is. It is very addicting.
Now, knowing what I know today, if I was at 499.2, I would have cooled the truck off. I would have paid the shop an extra $50 to let my truck sit there. I probably would have tightened up my valve lash a little bit, trying to get a little bit more out of that stock cam,
a little more lift,
and I might have got 501 out of it. But that comes with experience. I mean, I could have gained almost 2 horsepower with the experience I've gained.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I want to go back. Something about correction factors. We were talking about the differences and how turbos have a lot of excess capacity. Do you think that a dyno should correct for turbos? Because like on a stock truck, we've talked about how like there's a lot of overhead in the truck. This is why you can put like a tuner on a truck and pick up 100 horsepower because there's a lot of overhead in the turbo system already. So is it fair to correct for turbocharged vehicles? Pretty
much every vehicle. I don't even think we really discussed that much. Almost any factory vehicle has excess built into the turbos. You can add, I mean, even on like a Ford EcoBoost, you can add 100 horsepower at the tune. Why? Just like you said, there's some excess overhead built in the turbos, but why would the factory do that?
Well, I mean, to not push everything to the limit. That way it's happy place. You're not like super speeding the turbos every time you have to go up a hill.
I also think it keeps their power more consistent.
Yeah.
So, a turbocharged vehicle will probably make a lot more similar power here and at sea level versus Cedar City in a stock form. Because those turbos will just spin a little faster up here to make the extra pressure.
And they're using wastegates to be able to cap the boost or whatever it is at whatever pressure.
A lot of times the sensors are absolute pressure sensors. I mean, it's true pressure, not just pressure above atmosphere. So, 36 absolute here is the same as 36 absolute in Florida. So if they're using that for their sensors, you're getting the same amount of pressure here as you are in Florida.
Yeah. And so there's going to be a little bit of like loss here just because the turbo is having to work harder, and so it's going to back up whatever. It's like I don't think it's going to make the exact same number, but within a couple percent. And so let's just say here you get a 25% correction factor. You're probably on a bone stock truck, you're probably down maybe 5% horsepower, but it's not a lot, but it's not what the correction factor is actually giving you. That's the argument a lot of people will try to make, that a turbo is a altitude compensation device. Like we had a couple dozers back on the farm, and 2 of them had a high altitude package. It means it has a turbo. And so everyone's like, oh, you don't need a correction factor because you got a turbo.
Did they have the same fuel setting roughly?
I actually don't know. One, they made
But they made about the same power, right?
I don't remember. They made like 100 horse. Like it was an old VE12 valve.
Nice.
How many milk jugs of air did the turbo one consume versus the non-turbo one?
I never measured, actually, funny enough. But no, so like obviously correction factors came from gas engines, and you're correcting for lack of oxygen. And so when you're up at altitude, the blade's not going to open anymore. There's no compensation for that. And so they created a correction factor. That way you can dyno your whatever horsepower car anywhere in the world, and it should make about the same corrected horsepower. Well, then you get turbos, and people are like, oh, you can't correct turbos. Well, that is true, somewhat true for a stockish build. The problem is when you start pushing your truck to the limit, you're pushing the truck to what the turbo's capable of. The turbo's only capable of spinning so fast. It's only capable of moving so much volume of air. Well, when it's having to move more volume to get the same oxygen, it can no longer compensate for that altitude. You're pushing it to the limit. And so now if you have an air limited setup where that turbo is trying as hard as it can at sea level, you go up to an altitude, you're going to lose that percentage of air. If you have 25% less oxygen here, you're going to lose about 25% horsepower. And that's what that correction factor comes in for.
So what about companies using corrected numbers in their marketing? Let's say I'm selling a stock replacement Borg-Warner K27 turbo. Any vendor can buy that Borg-Warner turbo from Borg, the exact same turbo. I test it and I say it makes 400 horsepower max here on my fact. No, I'm going to use uncorrected numbers. I say it makes 350 horsepower because I'm a purist.
Mm-hmm. And we're at 5,800 feet here. Our atmospheric pressure is like 11 and a half, something like that, versus 14.7 at sea level.
So let's say we're hardware performance in Florida. They generally have a negative correction factor if they were to use that, because they have, well, not generally, but they, in certain times they could have better than perfect ideal conditions. And they test that same turbo and they say it's a 450 horsepower turbo. So
I'm going to buy from him.
Are you going to buy from him?
Yeah, from a marketing standpoint, you were marketing it as a 350 horsepower turbo. He's marketing it as a 450. As a consumer, I'd be like, dude, why would I buy a 350 horsepower turbo when I could buy a 450 horsepower turbo?
And so this is a problem you can have with identical products.
Oh, yeah.
Can you imagine if you're both modifying this turbo in certain ways? Maybe our billet wheel's better. Maybe his turbine wheel's better. It doesn't, if it's actually modified, it gets even more messy. And that fuels the conflict.
And usually when you're paying attention to companies like us or people like other people in the industry here, like trying to make power, we're usually pushing these turbos kind of like Meyer said, to the limit of what they're capable of. Mm-hmm. And at that point, if you've ever looked on the internet and you've seen a turbo compressor map, they have a point which they will not move any more air. They limit. They don't move infinite air forever. They choke out. And if you get to that point, now the atmosphere feeding that turbo is vitally important, just as if it's naturally aspirated, because your turbo is naturally aspirated before the turbocharger.
Mm-hmm. Also, fun fact about compressor maps, the nerdy people out there know what those are. They are also corrected. They are corrected to a certain temperature and a certain pressure. So there you go.
Yeah, it's absolutely true.
And I hear those gas test stands are in the multi-million-dollar range to build. Surely they could figure out a way to make it so they don't need a corrected number, right?
So
apparently not.
I'm going to say that if I was let's just say if I was back in Missouri and let's just say we were at 6,000 feet or whatever it is, and I was trying to work on performance and there's no such thing as correction factor, and I had a buddy that lived down at 600 feet, I would 100% get super nerdy and figure out how much more oxygen he has than me and then make my own correction factor. That is what I would do. I don't have to, because SAE did it for us.
So my younger brother lives in Phoenix. Phoenix is a low altitude, Cedar City's 5,800 feet. At one point, my wife had this 6.2 liter Yukon XL, it's a big 6.2 liter LS naturally aspirated. I'd ported the heads a little, put a cam on it. I went down to Phoenix and he had a Ford Expedition with the EcoBoost. And we got in a stoplight race, full kids in the back of mine, all of his kids in the back of his. And I waxed him. I mean, we're talking 3 car lengths. And he was like, this can't be, he was dumbfounded. Now, all that aside, fast forward 6 months, he comes up to visit me here in Cedar City. We do the same race. He beats me here. No mods, just vehicle. The difference is my vehicle, my wife's vehicle, loses about 25% of its power here. And his, because it's turboed and it's stock, it's not tuned, it doesn't lose that much. He might have only lost 5% here. Mm-hmm. So that brings up the point. Is the full percentage of the correction factor valid for turbo vehicles?
it's super blurry.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, because no one knows how hard you're pushing your turbo. I mean, are you at the limits of what it can do? Or are you not? If you're not there, then that correction is probably not very good for you. Most guys here are pushing the turbos as hard as they can, and it's just spinning its guts out, and that's kind of how it goes. But there is that. So my next question is to move on to the next topic. Do you think in like specifically referencing dyno competitions, the things we go to, trying to make horsepower numbers, and they have like different classes. Do you think the correction is fair in these dyno classes?
So I'm going to say correction doesn't matter when you go against, like when you're going to a dyno competition, or like if you're going with your buddies, you all dynoed the same day with the same numbers. At that point, it doesn't matter if it's reading double what it should. You made more than this guy and less than that one.
What if you and your buddy are just dynoing, like you're dynoing the UCC, the Northwest Dyno Circuit's up here today in Cedar City, and next month is down in Phoenix, and you and your buddy dyno, would you say, and you're both pushing your turbos to the max, would you say, okay, we can have a little bit of a fair fight here?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'd say that's the fairest fight you could have, is to have the correction factor. Cause yeah, you're going to have say 20% more to air down in Phoenix, and he should hopefully make 20% more power. Now, if you get really nitty gritty, it should be on the same day, but if you can't be the same day, same location, that's the best you got, is using the correction factor.
Now, same scenario, but you're putting 8 kits of nitrous into the turbo
again,
system.
Again, it gets quite blurry.
Atmosphere in a bottle. So
can you correct for nitrous?
I would argue that a small amount of nitrous does create more exhaust energy, which drives the turbos harder, spins them past their choke point more. And so you still gain air beyond what the nitrous gives you, because the turbo is able to spin faster. But if you're at the limits of what the turbo can consume, then the nitrous should have some correction, because you're not getting what you could. But should you get the same amount? I don't think so. I think it's another blurry area, and no one can determine how much nitrous you sprayed, how close you're to your turbo system. So it's one of those things that everybody just continues to use the corrected number. But I remember when Chris Patterson, when he hit 3,400, I think at the weekend on Edge,
3402, something like that.
So
Yeah.
he had the highest number ever on the Northwest
Still
Dyno
does.
Circuit. Dyno still has it. When they looked at the raw number, because there was a healthy 25% correction, which that's what the atmospheric conditions were that day. No, he did not make the highest raw number they've ever had on that dyno. They've had higher raw numbers down in Indiana. And so it's just kind of, once again, so in that measuring contest of who's the man,
There's always a way of spinning the data to make it so you're still the man.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I feel like if you go to a competition, do everything you can to make the most power you can, if that's what you're trying to do, and that's what you did. And so, man, that's a 3,400 is a crazy number. That's a
it is.
number.
Like, that's impressive regardless of where, how
I
you did
remember
it.
when I think he's the first one to hit 3,000, right? And it's at the same event that I went to. I hit 1,400, and he got a lot of flack for that, because he, hit 3,000. This dyno is super,
corrected.
Yeah.
Super
It was
generous.
on the mountain.
No, it was not on the mountain.
It was actually a negative correction factor that day. Like,
And I still got 1,400 on my 1,100 horsepower truck. But
You're not talking about, I thought you were talking about in Aurora, Colorado.
No, I'm talking about,
you're talking about in Delaware or wherever.
That King of the Streets. We hit 3,000, and I think I believe that was the first time it had happened.
yeah, that was the first. He was the first one to hit 3XXX.
And I know he got a lot of hate for it because he did it on a dyno.
It didn't count. It wasn't the
But it's
UCC dyno.
Dude, the guy went to a competition that was held. He didn't choose the dyno. It came there, and that's what he got. And it was cool. And yeah, regardless of what it was more than double what I made. My truck's freaking fast.
Yeah.
When somebody doubles your number
Yeah.
and you feel like your truck is like sketchy fast,
Yeah.
you're like, wow.
Yeah, so
Yeah, it was a wild to watch. It's
yeah,
crazy.
it was very cool. So anyway, I feel like I don't like it when people like get mad at someone who like, I just went to an event, I got on my truck, I posted the number. I'm not a jerk for doing that. I didn't choose a dyno. I didn't choose anything. It's just what happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, it's just kind of funny how things happens.
So there are differences in dynos. We've seen differences in price and stuff. What's the difference between a loaded and an unloaded dyno, Meyer?
So an unloaded dyno is a lot of what you get for like these gasser dynos and whatever else.
Just call it out. It's what a dyno jet gives you.
Cool. Well, so what that is it's a steel roller. They know the mass, they know the diameter. They know if it accelerates at X rate, they can do the math and say, oh, it took this many horsepower to accelerate that roller at this rate. And so that's how it gives you a number. Is it does the math and says, oh, okay, this is how much horsepower you made. Well,
So that's your like inertia number, the
Yep,
amount of
inertia
inertia
number.
you put into the drum. Okay.
Mhm.
If you hear inertia down, that's what they're talking about.
And it's not actually measuring horsepower, right? It's measuring the torque
It's
that goes into the drum.
it's measuring both the RPM and the torque that goes into the drum, and it calculates the
Calculates
horsepower
the
from
horsepower.
that. Yeah, thanks, Will. Why don't you just explain this?
I'm just saying that like it's like crazy because everybody's just like, oh, the torque number is not right, but the horsepower is right. And I'm like, it read the torque to calculate the horsepower that you then say the torque is wrong.
Anyway, then if you have a loaded dyno, it is the same. It's got the roller. It does the math. It's all the same setup, except it now also has a eddy or some form of braking system in the dyno, and it has a strain gauge figuring out that measures how much braking is actually occurring. And so then it's taken the roller inertia and figuring out a horsepower number, and then it looks at how much strain is on that strain gauge that the brakes are applying, and it knows that RPM, and it adds another horsepower. So let's just say it calculates 500 horsepower from the inertia, and it says, okay, we have this much force, this much RPM. That's another 500 horsepower from the braking action going on, and that says, okay, you've just made 1,000 horse, and that's how that works.
And so for us specifically, we work a lot on diesel trucks. What would be your preferred dyno if you're wanting to do something? What would you like to do?
So we want to be on a loaded dyno because load on turbo diesels tends to make the engine work harder, and it just generates more boost. It basically makes the engine work the way it normally works. Diesels are kind of a lower RPM engine. So as you rev up in higher RPM, the engine efficiency drops off. And if the efficiency drops off and the turbo is not fully spooled before then, it's like you almost miss the window of what it's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people complain when they get on an unloaded dyno that my truck only made 20 pounds of boost, and on the street it makes 30 pounds of boost with the same setup.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's because there's not enough load there. So I prefer to have a loaded dyno for that. The other reason I like a loaded dyno, if I wanted to do some tow simulation testing like we're doing,
Oh yeah.
and I wanted to measure like sustained EGT numbers, it's better in all that. The only downside I'd say with a loaded dyno is if the load cell, which isn't the thing that's stealing load from the drum, the actual strain gauge, if those are miscalibrated, then that can throw off the number, because it could be stealing more horsepower from the drum than it's giving you credit for, or it could be taking less than it's giving you credit for and almost inflating your number. And the way you do that is there's a calibration bar that comes with it with a set weight that's down to like 1/10 of a gram that you put on there, and you're supposed to every month or so recalibrate the strain gauge.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, one time we were messing around with that just to see what would happen, and I put a whole bunch of load on the strain gauge, and then I think so it had this bogus correction, and then we put this Volkswagen diesel bug that Alana owned, and I think it hit like 2,300 horsepower.
It was bone stock.
But unloaded, not a chance. It would only make about 100 horsepower unloaded, but loaded, it made 2,300. So there are ways to manipulate things.
Yeah, and then as like a shop owner, I like to think that we try to be fairly honest and like try to get hard data, especially because a lot of stuff is before and after. So even if we were to miscalibrate the dyno for some reason, it's a before and after. We picked up 10 horse, whatever. But we don't. I can say that I've never messed with the dyno. I've always tried to make it read as accurate as possible. But from a shop owner standpoint, you're a podunk guy and you have like, hey, I have this tune that will make your truck make 550. I have a dyno to show you. I would be very tempted.
So basically, there's incentive for small shops to mess with their stuff in attempts to,
It'd be very easy.
sell more tunes or certain parts. And then people go, oh, I'm going to go get tuned by Billy Bob's shop because he can get 500 horsepower to my Mustang. It's like, or my
Can he really?
Can he really?
Maybe he can. I don't know. But it's just like when it goes back to like looking at numbers and dyno graphs for stuff, really know who you're working with. It's really important. Is the company you're working with, the guy you're working with, an honest, trustworthy guy, because the numbers can be manipulated in a way to make anything look the way you want. Just like in accounting, you can make it look however you want.
Yeah. And that's a great reason. Like if you're trying to decide if you should dyno your truck, go to a Northwest dyno circuit or some dyno circuit where people are dynoing. Like like the Northwest Dyno circuit, that they dyno hundreds of trucks every year. If someone showed me that their truck made some fluke high horsepower with a the Northwest Dyno circuit graph, I'd be like, dude, you did it. Good job. Like, that's
Okay.
impressive.
Speaking of that, you have dynoed more than Will or I in the Northwest Dyno circuit.
Quite possibly.
So, I'm hoping we've convinced somebody here listening, like, hey, I should go to a Northwest Dyno circuit and I'm going to run my truck. It's going to be fun.
Absolutely.
What should they know? Give them a couple quick pointers, things they might want to know beforehand. You're going to be nervous and it is fun. Even to this day, we're still nervous. It is fun. You will have fun. But here's a couple of tips from the master of the Northwest Dyno circuit.
I don't know if I'd call it that, but okay. So it's very, very simple. You're going to be nervous and that's okay. It's going to happen and it'll be fine. The little bit of pre-research you should do before you actually drive up to the dyno is figure out what RPM your truck wants to operate at. If you try to floor your truck at 1100 RPM, it's going to bog. It's not going to actually accelerate. You got to figure out what that RPM is. Generally 2000, 1800 is a good baseline. If you're stockish, if you've got bigger turbos, you probably already figured this out. But let's just say 1800 RPM. Go on the highway. You want to grab your highest gear. There is a myth out there, like you want to dyno in your direct gear because the transmission steals the least amount of horsepower. That might be true on a gasser or something. Honestly, gassers want lower gears anyway because they don't make enough power. But on a diesel, you want load. And so generally you want that highest load possible, which is going to be your highest gear. So take your 2000 RPM, go on the highway in your highest gear, figure out what mile an hour that is. Because when you roll up on that dyno, they're going to ask you, where do you want to start? And now you've got that data for them. You can say, oh, I want to start at 75 miles an hour. Perfect. Now you guys are both on the same page. But driving up on the dyno,
in a stock truck or stockish truck, you probably want to be
a little
fast
lower
enough to where you can floor it and it doesn't downshift.
Yes, and that's very, very true. You got an automatic, you don't want it to downshift because it'll throw it off. It'll try to upshift again. So there's a little bit of a strategy there. You just got to kind of play with it. Maybe not just floor it right out of the gate, roll into it.
Yep.
Your first time, don't expect to be a success. Plan on doing it multiple times. It's A-okay.
Yeah.
But once you got your data, you kind of got your plan, what you're going to do. You're going to get in line, get up to the front. They're going to start waving you on. Elmer will get really pissed at you if you're looking at the rollers or something, not watching him. So just watch Elmer.
Watch the guy who's waving you up.
He's going to say, yep, left, right, up, keep coming, keep coming. Remember, that roller can spin. So when your truck gets on top of the roller, don't expect to just be able to drive over it. You got to hit it with a little bit of momentum so you can get up on top of the roller. It's not a big deal. Just roll up on there. Front tires are going to go over. Rear tires are going to get on it. He's going to tell you to stop. You slam those brakes. It should stop you right there at the top of the roller. No problem. Now he's going to strap you down, ask you what kind of power numbers, ask you if you've ever done this before. You're going to probably say no if this is your first time. He'll answer any question you have. It's not a big deal. Then he's going to have you roll it. All they're doing is they're have you put it in gear so those tires can spin slowly, and that way they can make sure everything's straight. That way everything's, the straps are still tight, everything's ready to go. He's going to say, okay, good, you're rolled, you're good. Get up to whatever mile an hour you want to start at. What is that RPM? What is that mile an hour? Cool. Okay, are you ready? Yep, I'm ready. Okay, go for it. And he's going to hit the load. It's going to try to suck that engine down. You got to give it some throttle to keep it up and then floor it and zing through the window. And then when he sees that horsepower start to dive down, he's going to wave you off and you're going to let off and he's going to give you a number. That's really all there is to it.
And they unstrap you and back you down and the crowd cheers.
And then once again, watch Elmer. Yes. Going backwards, I still just watch Elmer because even if I'm doing it wrong, I want him to tell me I was doing it right.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about advanced dyno techniques.
Oh dear.
A little bit of strategy, so you want to be big dog. You want to go hit 2,000 on dyno. I think my highest dyno number ever is like 1650. I've never even been over 1600, but as both of you have been much higher than me. I mean, Todd, you've been up there like what, 27?
Yeah, 27, high 27s on our dyno.
So what's some strategy you could tell us that you've learned, at this power level? How do you make the big numbers?
You got to clench really hard.
Pretty much.
So just clench real hard.
That's all it takes.
And push the foot all the way down.
Yeah, that's actually a big thing. Like multiple people are like, "Oh, why is it not making any power?" It's like put your foot through the floor. And I've dynoed, we have a dyno test truck. We dyno all the time, and we had a group of kids that some group of kids that wanted
church group came and they wanted to,
and they were wanted to see stuff. And I was like, dude, hop in. Like, so we went through and dynoed every single one of them. And the kid that did the absolute best was the one that didn't know how to drive. I was like, perfect. Nothing will apply. Just floor it.
Because the people that know how to drive, they're like, do I floor it all the way? Do I hit the brakes? You're like, no, you just smack it.
Yep. No, it was great. But anyway.
But there is actually some technique. It's not just like get up there and floor. Like when I was doing these big power numbers, The Godfather, years back, or that, mid to 2,000 horsepower numbers repeatedly over and over, we noticed a bunch of rubber behind the tires on the floor. And so it's very obvious we were spinning the wheels. And so we started playing a lot with how do we load this thing? ATS has a winch on their dyno. They actually winch you down. They suck your axle down. And so that's one way to really effectively limit tire speed.
Traction is a big problem
as the power
at that
gets
big
up,
power level.
As power gets up, traction becomes an issue. Sub 1,000 horsepower, I don't think you need to mess with anything. On like the Northwest Dyno circuit, we have these big, huge rollers. I don't think it matters. But you get north of 1,000, it probably starts making a difference where you actually put the truck. And so we kind of tried a bunch of things. Do you think we tried the back first, the rear of the roller? Is that what we did first?
I think we did try climb, because it makes sense. If you climb the roller, you're going to get more traction.
Well, you don't. You get less traction.
So putting on the back of the roller, I remember we were playing with a junker drag truck one time, and we put it on the back of the roller, and I proceeded to do the biggest burnout on the dyno. I went through all 4 gears. It never fully, I think it only hit like 450 horsepower. And at the time it was making right around 1,000 horsepower. And all we could put down was 450 through this rolling burnout of tire smoke and screeching. And the back of the roller is not the play. Right on the very top of the roller, to me, feels like there might be slightly less rolling resistance. So if I was doing a stock truck and I was trying to get as high a horsepower as possible, I would put it right on the very top of the roller. Ideally, you want your test repeatable. So we try not to unstrap trucks when we're testing lower powered things and small changes. We try to leave the truck strapped on so that there's no differences in load or rolling resistance, things like that. But when we're doing the mega horsepower, you got to be in the front of the roller. So you got to roll up over the top of the roller and onto the front.
Yeah, and in doing that, it solved our problems. All of a sudden, our power numbers went up. And then we actually started noticing we were turning tires on the bead. We had so much traction, we exceeded the traction between the tire and the rim.
And these aren't aired down slicks. These are street, sticky
radials.
street drag radials that are at full pressure, and they're still turning
We started marking the valve stem with a little paint pen. And after the runs, we'd see, okay, we're about an inch on that one. The tire.
Oh, gosh.
But I'm surprised how many big power shops, it's generally ones that don't own a dyno, don't know that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember this fall, there was an event. And it was, what do they call that event?
In the mountains?
These are in the mountains, yeah. Industrial injection.
So Randy Reyes from Randy's Transmission shows up with his red Delicious truck, and he's swinging for 3,000 plus. He wanted the record. I guarantee he wanted more than 3401 or whatever. He wanted to be at the top of that throne. And it's a high altitude event, so it has
a correction factor,
a healthy correction factor.
Plus the DynoJet correction factor.
Plus it has a DynoJet wheel
on top of the
correction factor that dyno has. And he sprays a lot of nitrous. So you could argue that the correction factor is more than needs to be there, but a great opportunity to make the biggest number in the country. And he gets there, and I remember he has his dually, and they're strapping it on the back of the roller. And I came up before they started the run. I said, "Hey, you guys okay with how they're strapping this?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I was just like, "Okay, who am I to say anything? He's got dually. Maybe 4 tires has all the traction he needs." And I step away, and he makes his run. Of course, I pull out my camera, and the grill failed, and the grill went like 30 feet high. That's my joke. The engine blew up, and it was pretty catastrophic. Nobody got hurt, and anyway, and I remember afterwards, the engine builder that was there, they were like, "Oh, the freaking transmission slipped and hooked and slipped 3 times on the data log, and it loaded that engine so weird. That's why it blew up." And then Randy's a transmission builder, and Randy's just like, "No, I looked at the data log. The transmission did not slip." And I'm sitting here looking at my footage, and I'm like, I see white tire smoke coming off the rear rollers throughout the run.
On and off, on and off.
On and off, on and off. And so I don't know if the engine would have not blown up had it hooked up, but I guarantee it would have made more horsepower before it blew up. And so that's, to me, an error that if you own a dyno, you would make, or an advice I give to listeners, if you are going for big horsepower, you need to strap it on the front side of the roller, so roll up over the top and onto the front. And you need enough straps that the truck cannot stretch the straps and the tires grow a little with speed. You don't want the tires contacting the stationary part of the dyno because that will also steal horsepower.
Yeah.
But that was a mistake they made that, I'm not saying that's why it blew up. I'm not here to, I'm just saying I saw wheels spin. Engine builder thought that the varying RPM hurt the engine potentially, and the transmission builder said data log said there was no slip on the drive shaft speed versus the engine RPM. But I'm telling you, there was definitely some slip between the tire and the roller.
We're talking about this big dog stuff. I'm going to give you another piece of advice. We've tried it, so you don't have to. Track bite doesn't work. We're not the only ones that have tried it. No one has gotten it to work. So you don't need to.
I see tons of gas. I see Cletus McFarland. I see guys doing a hairspray on some of these like Rice Rocket videos. I'm telling you, I don't know if it's because they have really smooth rollers. These big knurled rollers that you get on these big dynos for these diesel trucks that is not the play.
I don't know what you do on a front wheel drive truck. or a front wheel drive vehicle. It's not relevant. I'm just thinking, would you still?
I think you'd still go on the front of the roller because the straps the straps are super tight. When you're pulling against the straps are tight. They're pulling against something. They're pulling against the tire on the roller. And so if you can have it pull it into the roller,
that's what's happening.
That's what's happening.
Logically, that's what I would try for sure.
Yeah.
I don't
know.
I mean, from a physics standpoint, you get more grip when it's pulling into the roller than vertical.
Yeah.
The normal force, they call it, increases when you get on the front of the roller. And that's why there's more traction there.
Interesting.
But at the end of the day, that's something that took us a while to learn. And then once we learned it, we had to figure out how to keep the tires from moving. And then after that, there's other things that move that you can't measure.
You guys see people making, it's crazy how 2,000 horsepower is like not even like, that's not unheard of. So many people are doing 2,000. Now 3,000 is like the number, and half a dozen people have hit that. It is unreal how much goes into it to try to get it to hold that. Yeah. Not just get the engine to hold that, every piece along the way, and how much needs to go right in order for that number to come up on the screen.
I mean, 5 years ago, if you talked a Dodge 48 RE transmission builder, how much line pressure do you need to, make a 2,000 horse drag truck go down the track? 180, 200, maybe 220. Well, we found in some of this dyno competitions, you need more than 220 line pressure.
Yeah. To make that power hold.
That's crazy.
It slips the clutches and the trans, and they're slipping small enough that there's not obvious signs that it was slipping in there. But I can tell you this, when we put more line pressure, no changes to the tune, and the truck makes more power.
How's that happen?
Yeah.
There's things like the weight of the oil and the differentials, the weight of the drive shafts. You got to remember, they are measuring inertia. So the more weight you have to accelerate, that is a penalty that you're not getting credit for. Your horsepower is being consumed in accelerating weight. So lightweight race wheels, there's all kinds of things that, like, for example, Randy's using his dually. I think he is penalizing himself with extra rolling weight that he's got to accelerate. Big, heavy axles are not your friend, but you need enough axle to hold the power.
Yeah.
You need enough drive shaft to hold the power. So there's competing things there, but at the end of the day, I'm not an expert on the dyno because who am I to say? I haven't made big power like you guys, but I think about it.
Yeah, but
I haven't even
you've
made
been
that
part
much.
of all the builds as much as all of us. We made it in a vehicle that you've been.
I feel like one of us were solo had to make a big number, you would have the best likelihood of doing it.
Absolutely. Okay, well, real quick, we're going to wrap this up, but I want to hear your favorite experience on the dyno. Something you did in your own truck or something, or you've been.
It's easy.
Give me your favorite dyno story.
Okay. So I had just common rail swapped the shorty. It wasn't making the power I wanted, and it didn't feel. I mean, it felt good, but it didn't feel great. And we were about to go.
What's the shorty?
The shorty is my regular cab, two-wheel drive, short bed, second gen. It's a 95. It had a 12 valve in it.
So it's a 1995 Dodge Ram single cab short bed custom.
Yep. I bought it with a 12 valve in it. Made 550 horse. It was a blast to drive. I decided I wanted to go crazier, so I put a common rail in it. And I knew in order to win the small compound class, which is what I wanted to compete in, I needed around 1,000. Like mid-9s might do it, but I needed around 1,000. And so I common rail swapped it, put some pretty good turbos on there, and Did it in a weekend. Got back on the dyno. It felt good. It felt great, but didn't feel crazy. I was like, this is not 1,000 horse. It's like maybe 700. But we went through trying to figure out what was going on. We went on the dyno. This was like 4 a.m. And it was Josh and I. We didn't have a login to the dyno, and the dyno was never logged out. Well, it was logged out. So we had to dyno it. And I just floored it from first, went through the gears so Josh could like watch a mechanical fuel pressure gauge, because that's pretty sketchy to do on the street. Anyway, this whole rigmarole, figured out one of the CP3s was probably bad. So I swapped out the CP3, took Rowdy for one of our R&D guys for a rip in it. He was, and
at 4 a.m?
No, this was the next day. I swapped the CP3 next day.
I've never seen that guy work that early in the morning.
So he was watching a boost gauge, because I couldn't watch the boost gauge and keep it straight. So he was watching the gauge, and he's like rattling off like the boost numbers, and I'm like keeping it straight. I'm like, okay, like this is much better. We're doing good. Anyway, so I get to the event and going up against Tyler Kipp. I'm in line. Tyler Kipp's like, oh, like what's done to this thing?
Where does Tyler Kipp work?
He works at Industrial Injection, but he was like, oh, he's like, what's done to this thing? And I was like, it's got it's HT4B compounds on it with a HE351. And I was like, what do you think it's going to make? And he's like, it's like 700. I was like, no way, dude. I've driven 550 on the street. Like this will burn the tires in overdrive. Like it's gotta be more than 700. And he's like, no, it'll do 700. And I was like, and he's like, what gear ratio is in it? And I said, there are 410s. He's like, oh yeah, no way. 750 max, absolutely top. Anyway, he downed his truck. He made like 800. I put the shorty
His truck was also a common rail swapped second gen.
No, so this is tow truck back in the day.
It was a tow truck.
Yeah, it was a 480 compounds though. Anyway, getting up to it, get the truck on the dyno. Elmer asked, how much am I going to make? And I was like, dude, I would love to make 9, but probably mid 8s if I had to guess. Like it does okay, but I don't know if it's that crazy. And so I do a run at pulls. It feels good to me. Elmer's like, okay, did 1,061. I was like, cool. Like, what did it actually make though? And he's like, no, it made 1,061. I leaned out the window. I was like, Tyler, suck it. And that will be forever the best dyno pull I've ever done.
Now, it's a little bit of that whole David and Goliath thing. I mean, not that, but I mean, you had these old like junkyard turbos.
It was a whole junkyard setup. I mean, it was 2 stock pumps like stacked, and one of the stock pumps I got for $50 was defective, and that was my problem. So I had to put a different stock pump on there. Like it was a whole thing. It was crazy. It was super fun.
Oh, cool. Probably my favorite story was back when we were doing The Godfather. At this point in time, we had triple GT55s on it. I had my dual intercooler, aftercooler, all water cooled.
Really quick, roughly how many millimeters are these turbos? How big are they?
Had a 98 millimeter on the bolted to the engine with 206 millimeter atmosphere chargers.
So
lots of air.
Huge
air.
Biggest you can buy from Garrett. Okay.
Yeah,
gotcha.
And so we were doing polls, and we were in the mid 2000s. I mean, this truck did mid 2000s over and over and over on. It was awesome. Anyway, it was quite a rowdy experience. And when this thing would go, it was so loud and scary, but it was just air. It was like a big jet. It literally sounded like a jet on the runway. Like just you wouldn't even hear engine noise. All you heard was turbo air movement. I can't describe it better than that. It's crazy.
And there's no camera or microphone that picks it up. So there's no way of us sharing it with you.
You can't, you had to experience live. And anybody did it, like, oh my gosh, I think it's making power like nothing else. Because it just was, those turbos were insane. So anyway, all of our dyno stuff happens after work. And so we're usually like, midnight, 1, 2 in the morning. Like if you guys have seen some of our live streams, they sometimes happen like at 2 in the morning because we're on the dyno after work. So one day we're dynoing, and all of a sudden the fuzz rolls up. The couple of cops were up like, oh man, there goes our fun. Somebody called it in and is complaining. Now we're in an industrial park. It's illegal what we're doing, but it's loud, okay? And we understand that. And so they roll up, and I'm thinking, oh, they're going to tell us to shut it down. And we're like, hey, how's it going? Like, dude, we were like, a couple neighborhoods over, and we heard this thing. We've been kind of driving around trying to figure out where it's at. And we found it. Like, what the heck is this thing? We're like, oh, cool, man. They're not here to shut us down. They're just wanting to hang out. And so anyway, they're like, wow, we're telling them about it. I'm like, oh, that's very cool. And they're like, well, you want to see us do a run? I'm like, sure. And so they did a run, and they had their little, their whole body vest, their bullet armor, armor-proof vest, and they have their body cameras on. Like, oh, we're going to record
because they're the night beat. They're dressed for war, basically.
Yeah. Right. And so the body camera's like, yeah, they'll do a run here. And we're like, okay. And so I started doing a pull, and they're kind of close, like to the truck, and with their cameras on them, and everybody else is like, diving behind dumpsters and hiding behind
the
trucks.
People that have been there before.
Yeah, they know what's going on. They're like, this would be cool. And so I get in overdrive and the turbos start spooling up. And as the turbos start coming up, they just start walking back. They kind of cover their chest, they cover their junk with their hand. They're walking back and they start walking back faster and faster. And then the turbos light and it just goes crazy. And they're like, oh my gosh. And anyway, I wish I would have had that video. I wish we'd have videoed that whole thing.
So if we could have videoed their expression, like, these are like hardened. I mean, we're not like in the ghetto, but I mean, they're experienced law enforcement wearing armor, and they were just like, duck and cover, man.
And so that was pretty fun because I mean, at that point in time, that was like the pinnacle of The Godfather, just making huge power repeatably. It was so fun to listen to and be part of, and yeah, so those guys got to experience it, and it was pretty fun.
I think my best dyno ever was in the junker, and we were up in Lolo, Montana at this event, and Josh and I went up there, and it was a Northwest Dyno Circuit event, and they also had a dirt drag. So I had brought the junker drag truck with some scoops to the dirt drags, and that was the highest fuel only number. I think I made 1502 fuel only on the dyno, and I was like, it's a nice solid number, and I think I ended up getting like second place overall in the whole event, or I don't know. Anyway, won something. Well, then they decided to, so I was like, well, now I'm going to put the paddle tires on and do the dirt drags. Well, some people were there. I was kind of early when I dynoed. Not a lot of people knew that the junker had just made 1,500 horsepower, which I'd never ran down the drag strip with that much power because it's kind of sketchy at 1,000. And so I was like, the dirt, how bad could it be, And so I go up there and I line up at the starting line and, of course I build way more boost than I normally would at the drag strip. And I take off and I grab gears as fast as I can. And I bury the whole starting line, the audience, with dust and rocks. The event organizer comes up and he's just like, there's some broken windshields out in the parking lot. I could let you do an exhibition at the end after everybody's gone. But he's like, I can't let you run again. Somebody's going to die. And I'm like, I'm good. I smacked a big number, very memorable dyno event, and
the video of that run. Oh my gosh. You guys ever watch those, like those boats, those like airfoil boats that use that huge rooster tail of water back? That's what your truck looked like, of dirt. This huge rooster tail of dirt, 40 feet in the air. Like, it just looks so ridiculous. It was awesome.
Everybody's like, how much boost did it make? And I hit the peak recall. I was like, well, it buried the 150 gauge. So I don't know, a little over 150 pounds of boost. They're like,
what?
Insane. But that was a fun dyno event / got a dyno and then got to actually feel what did that feel like moments later. It was very memorable for me. Awesome. It was a lot of fun that I had there.
Well, cool. Well, anyway, guys, I think that's going to wrap up this episode. If you guys have not been on a dyno, I highly encourage you to do so. It'll make it fun. Put some parts in your truck, get on a dyno, and you'll have that bug in you like we have in us. It's addictive. It's fun for a reason. So get out there, have some fun, go compete. And yeah, I think we'll see you next time on the Power Driven Podcast.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.